Ludwig Beck, the general who gave everything to oppose Hitler. Let's have this conversation. Once regarded as one of Germany's foremost generals and a staunch supporter of Hitler, General Ludwig Beck ultimately became one of his most formidable opponents. This narrative explores Beck's transformation, his acts of defiance, and the sacrifices that determined his destiny. Beck's evolution from a proficient military leader to an unexpected foe of Hitler commenced well before the ascent of the Nazi regime. Born in 1880, he joined the German army in 1898, quickly making a name for himself as a staff officer on the Western Front during World War I. In the interwar period, Beck played a pivotal role in shaping German military doctrine as a principal architect of the Reichswehr, the armed forces of the Weimar Republic, which were constrained by the Treaty of Versailles. His most notable achievement was the publication of the Truppenführung Manual in 1933, which became foundational to German tactical doctrine. This manual advocated for flexibility, initiative, and mission-oriented tactics, which later underpinned the Blitzkrieg strategy. Its impact reached beyond Germany, influencing military strategies throughout Europe and the United States. Serving as the chief of the German General Staff from 1935 to 1938, Beck was a strong proponent of German military rearmament, convinced it was essential for restoring national strength. However, he soon became apprehensive about Hitler's ambitions, realizing that military expansion was being directed towards reckless aggression rather than legitimate defense. Initially, during the early years of Nazi rule, Beck held an optimistic view that the regime would fortify Germany. He held the belief that an authoritarian regime could establish stability to address various challenges. However, as Hitler's true intentions became evident, Beck's initial optimism diminished. His increasing apprehensions regarding the aggressive foreign policy signified his shift from a supporter to a critic. Beck, who prioritized military professionalism and adherence to international law, found himself in conflict with Hitler's expansionist agenda. The Sudeten crisis of 1938 served as a pivotal moment. Beck observed with dismay as Hitler disregarded diplomatic warnings and propelled Germany toward war. He consistently cautioned that Germany was ill-prepared, both in military and economic terms. Yet Hitler's stance was unmistakable. War was unavoidable. For Beck, the situation transcended mere strategy. It became a matter of averting disaster. As Chief of Staff, Beck possessed unique insights into Hitler's strategies. Observing the Führer's indifference to military council and diplomatic protocols, he began to perceive Hitler as a reckless zealot, endangering Europe with impending conflict. As his skepticism grew, Beck found himself increasingly marginalized within the military establishment. Many of his peers, driven by fear, ambition, or loyalty to the Nazi ideology, adhered to Hitler's orders without question. As Beck's misgivings about Hitler's leadership intensified, a critical juncture approached that would challenge his allegiance to Germany against his moral convictions. In May 1938, Beck drafted a memorandum that signified the onset of his open resistance. This document contained grave warnings regarding Hitler's aggressive intentions and reflected Beck's understanding of the true nature of Hitler's ambitions. The memorandum specifically addressed Hitler's plans to invade Czechoslovakia, a course of action Beck vehemently opposed. He contended that such a move would spell disaster for Germany. Highlighting the capabilities of potential adversaries, Beck asserted that the French army was the most formidable military force in Europe and that Britain would likely support France in the event of a German attack. Beck's concerns extended well beyond military tactics. He perceived Germany's overall condition as unstable, especially regarding its economy and capacity to endure a prolonged war. As Hitler persisted in advocating for conflict, Beck's resistance grew stronger. He began rallying other generals to oppose Hitler's ambitions, and in June 1938 he took a more audacious step. He encouraged senior officers to contemplate a collective resignation as a strategy to compel Hitler to retract his war plans. He asserted, "If a soldier in a position of highest authority during such times confines his duties to the limits of military responsibilities without recognizing his greater obligation to the entire nation, he demonstrates a lack of greatness and an inability to grasp responsibility. Extraordinary circumstances necessitate extraordinary measures." Through these statements, Beck elevated his role beyond that of a general, embracing a moral duty to his nation. His actions during this time underscored the difficulties of upholding military professionalism under Nazi governance. As the chief of the general staff, he was expected to endorse and execute Hitler's directives. Nevertheless, his increasing awareness of the regime's true nature placed him in a progressively untenable situation. Beck found himself torn between his obligations as a soldier and his ethical beliefs as a German patriot. As his opposition became more evident, his standing within the military hierarchy became increasingly fragile. His attempts to sway Hitler's decisions from within the system were proving ineffective, leading to greater isolation with each passing day. The conflict between Beck's strategic outlook and Hitler's aggressive intentions reached a critical juncture. In August 1938, Beck proposed to Walter von Brauchitsch, the commander-in-chief of the German army, that a thorough reform within the Nazi regime was necessary to diminish the SS's influence while retaining Hitler as the dictator. During a summit on August 10th with prominent generals, Hitler dismissed Beck's concerns regarding the invasion plans for Czechoslovakia and managed to gain the backing of most of his military leaders. Beck was the only one to resign on August 18th, with General Franz Halder taking over as the head of the general staff. At Hitler's behest, Beck kept his resignation confidential. Although Hitler assured him of a significant field command in return for his discretion, Beck felt disillusioned when he was instead placed on the retired list. With his military career effectively concluded, Beck faced a decision. He could either fade into obscurity or resist. He chose the latter. From his residence in Berlin, he established an underground network of officers and politicians committed to toppling Hitler. His connections extended deep into the Wehrmacht, where rising discontent presented a chance for action. Beck's home in Berlin became a secret headquarters for a small group of dissenters. This assembly included both active and retired military personnel, along with conservative civilians who shared Beck's apprehensions about Hitler's governance. Among the conspirators was Admiral Wilhelm Canaris, the head of the Abwehr, Germany's military intelligence agency. Together, they began to lay the foundation for what would evolve into one of history's most audacious plots. The shift from military leader to resistance organizer was fraught with difficulties. Beck and his collaborators operated in a perilous environment where being discovered could lead to certain death. The Gestapo's influence was extensive and trust was scarce. Despite these dangers, Beck's reputation and connections enabled him to forge a network that encompassed both military and civilian spheres. As the resistance group expanded, Beck recognized the necessity of securing international support. He shifted his focus to diplomatic avenues, aiming to utilize foreign influence to counter Hitler's aggressive strategies. Beck's faction reached out to the British Foreign Office, sharing their intentions and requesting assurances. They were convinced that a strong warning from Britain could dissuade Hitler from his intended invasion of Czechoslovakia. In a daring initiative, Beck's group also sought the Vatican's support, sending Joseph Müller on a covert mission to Rome to engage Pope Pius XII as a mediator with the Western Allies. This effort underscored the urgency felt by the resistance and their readiness to pursue all possible options to avert the impending disaster. As Hitler's actions grew more belligerent, Beck's perspective on the necessity of removing the Führer from power began to shift. The resistance began to consider taking direct action against Hitler himself. However, they held some unrealistic expectations regarding the aftermath of their intended coup, believing they could negotiate a peace agreement with Britain and France that would permit Germany to keep certain territorial acquisitions. As the conflict continued, Beck emerged as a pivotal figure in what would later be referred to as the July 20th plot. The conspirators appointed him to serve as the acting head of state in the provisional government that would assume control following Hitler's assassination. This designation reflected the high regard in which Beck was held by his fellow conspirators, as well as their conviction that a strong leader was essential to restore stability to the nation in the wake of the coup. On July 20th, 1944, a single briefcase contained the destiny of Nazi Germany. Colonel Klaus von Stauffenberg, a pivotal figure in the resistance, brought an unassuming item into a military meeting at Hitler's Wolf's Lair in East Prussia. Concealed within was an explosive device intended to bring an end to Hitler's oppressive regime. The atmosphere among the resistance leaders was charged with tension. This moment was the culmination of years of meticulous planning. Although Beck was not directly involved in the assassination's planning or execution, he had been designated as the head of state for the provisional government that would succeed Hitler's administration. He remained in Berlin, anxiously awaiting the confirmation of Hitler's demise, ready to assume control. Stauffenberg discreetly placed the briefcase under the table where Hitler was seated, ensuring it was positioned for optimal effect. After setting the bomb, he left the room, citing an urgent phone call as his reason for departure. The conspirators, their hearts racing, awaited news of the explosion. The blast reverberated through the Wolf's Lair, creating a state of confusion. Conflicting reports emerged. Was Hitler dead or alive? In Berlin, Beck and his fellow conspirators faced a crucial choice. Should they move forward with the coup or wait for verification? Beck opted for decisive action. He reasoned that any delay would only allow Hitler's loyalists the opportunity to regroup. The resistance began to execute their plans, issuing commands to detain key Nazi officials and take control of essential communication hubs. As hours passed, the chaos escalated. Conflicting information continued to flood in, indicating that something had gone disastrously wrong. The revelation of the truth had a devastating impact on the conspirators. Hitler had survived the assassination attempt with only minor injuries, thanks to a last-minute maneuver by another officer that had inadvertently positioned the briefcase behind a sturdy table leg, thereby protecting the Führer from the full brunt of the explosion. As news of Hitler's survival circulated, the coup began to disintegrate. Loyal Nazi forces swiftly regained control, leaving the conspirators isolated and exposed. At the Army's headquarters on Bentlerstrasse in Berlin, the mood grew increasingly somber. Troops loyal to Hitler encircled the building. For Ludwig Beck, who had risked everything in an effort to liberate Germany from Hitler's tyranny, the moment of truth had arrived. Realizing that capture would lead to torture and execution, Beck attempted to take his own life. However, this effort resulted only in grave injury. Unable to finish the act himself, Beck's life was ultimately taken by a sergeant who executed him with a shot to the neck. Ludwig Beck's narrative serves as a poignant reminder that even those in positions of authority encounter moral dilemmas. Although his resistance culminated in tragedy, his defiance illustrated that not everyone in Nazi Germany followed Hitler without question. Thank you for watching. We trust you found this video enlightening. Please remember to subscribe and activate the notification bell for more content on World War histories, and we look forward to seeing you in the next video.